Hello. Are you ready to meet the goddess Pomona then? And learn the extraordinary stories of all the apples that have ever been? I am. I've even got my hard hat on just in case one falls out of a tree on my head. So, without further ado, let's go and meet Pomona.
Hello, my name is Pomona, and I'm the goddess of the apples. And today is a very special day because today is Apple Day. Now, I know you met another goddess yesterday, a goddess called Ceres, and she's the goddess of wheat and corn and all the grains, and we couldn't manage without her. But Ceres doesn't have a day named after her. I have a day, and today is my day. The 21st of October is the day when we all celebrate apples. Oh, by the way, Ceres, I made a little corn dolly in your workshop yesterday. Here's my corn dolly, and she's there, and I'm going to hang her on my tree later on in the workshop. I hope you made your corn dollies too. If you did make them, we'd love to see pictures of them. So why don't you take a little photograph of your corn dolly and send it to us? And then we'll be able to see what you've been up to. Anyway, I digress. Today is about apples. And I'm sitting here in my garden. Now, if I had a lot of apple trees, I could call this an orchard. But I've only got one. But this is a very special apple tree. This is a costard. Now, costards have been growing in England since the 1200s. They're a very ancient apple. Now, one fell off the tree this morning. This little apple here, it's a tiny little thing, and it's got two distinctive sides. It's got this very rosy side on the outside. That's the part that grows towards the sun, and it's much sweeter than the other side, which is green, which grows against the branch. And you'll find in the stories where apples feature a lot that the little apple is quite a two-sided fruit. Now, this little apple is quite acidic. It's quite sharp. I like it personally, but I think that people in the past perhaps were more used to eating bitter or sharp things than they are now. So for modern tastes, somebody might prefer something a little bit sweeter, but I rather like it, and it's extremely crunchy and it lasts a very long time. And this little tree here has been growing here for about 10 years.
Now, for those of you who've been to October Plenty before, the Lions Park Festival, October Plenty, you'll have seen me running the apple stall. And I'm there with hundreds of different types of English apples, all from Progdale in Kent. And I cut them up, along with some other people, and let you taste them. Because chances are you won't really have tasted all the different types of English apple, let alone heard all their wonderful names. Now, there are a lot of different types of apple. And when apples first grew in this country, it's thought that they came over with the Romans, and also the French brought them over in 1066. But people just grew them in their gardens or small holdings, and different apples grew in different parts of the country. So there wasn't really one famous apple, but lots of different types of apple, and it got to the point really where people didn't even know the names of the different types of apple, and they just sell them all together. There were some apples, like the costard that I showed you earlier, that people knew about, and it grew in lots of different places. And there was also an apple called the pear main, and that was a very famous apple, and it grew in lots and lots of different places. But really people didn't grow them on a sort of commercial scale like they do now. Because it's quite hard to replicate apples. You can't just plant an apple seed and get the same apple that the seed has come from. It'll maybe produce a different type of apple. It's not really very reliable. The only way to get the same apple is to graft. Take a cutting from the wood of the tree and bind it to a cut part of another tree, and it will grow the same apple. Which is why it was quite tricky to get the same apple growing in lots and lots of different places. It was rather an accidental sort of higgledy-piggledy thing. Now, I'm going to show you some apples which you might recognise. This one here. Now, I went to the supermarket today, which is something I do quite often, but I don't usually buy my apples at the supermarket because I feel that a lot of the time they don't really stock a lot of varieties, and they don't stock a lot of English apples either. Now, this one's a very nice apple. It's a sort of golden colour. I bet you know the name of it. It's called a Golden Delicious, and people like these, and this one's actually from France. Well, France is not that far away, so that's okay really. It hasn't travelled that far to get here. We do grow these in England, but they're slightly different. The next apple I've got here is a gala apple, and it's an apple that people like to eat because it's very, very sweet. This is quite a small one actually, but you can get them much bigger than this, and it's red, very, very brightly coloured red, and quite soft actually. The next apple I've got here, now this one I found on an apple tree when I was walking in the countryside the other day. And this is called a London pear Maine. Now, this is an old type of apple. This apple was grown in lots and lots of places, and it's very juicy. And they grow quite big, some of them. But you can't really buy them in the shops. Not the supermarkets anyway, which I think is a shame. Then, I've got the little costard off my tree. And I've got this apple. People like these apples a lot. They're very, very sweet. And they only started appearing in this country about sort of 10 years ago. And this one's called a Pink Lady. A little bit more expensive than maybe the Golden Delicious. But people like these because they're very, very sweet. Much sweeter than apples probably used to be. This one here is a very famous apple. If you like a green apple, you probably know this one. It's got quite a tough and sort of waxy skin. Does anybody know the name of it? It's called a Granny Smith. Granny Smith. It's quite sharp and very, very juicy. And now I've got a massive apple here. It's not as big as some of them grow. This big apple here, what do you think that is? This is not an eating apple. This is for cooking only. Like baked apples, or stewed apples, or apple pie. So this one is a Bramley apple, a Bramley seedling. And it's a very famous apple. And it's probably the most famous cooking apple that's around. And you can buy those in the supermarket as well. But this, oh, I can't forget this one, of course. This is a very famous apple, and lots of people like this apple. It's called a Cox's Orange Pippin, and it's one of the favourite apples, and you can get these in the supermarkets for some of the year. But the main thing is, I don't normally buy these Granny Smiths because they're grown in South Africa. Now, there's nothing wrong with apples growing in South Africa. I'm sure they grow beautiful apples. But we grow apples here. We don't need to get our apples from South Africa. We should be buying our own apples. So when you go shopping, you make sure that your mummy and daddy buy English apples, We don't want to be buying apples that have flown halfway across the world when we can grow our own apples. I will eat it though, because I've got it and I don't want to waste it. But by far the best apple from my point of view is this one. Now it's quite brown, isn't it? You might think that's not very nice, but that is my favourite apple, and that's called a russet. And there's even an apple in a poem I will do on October Plenty Day on Sunday that is called a knobby russet. And that's all a bigger apple than this, but it's all sort of warty, but it tastes gorgeous. And this is my favourite apple, and you can buy these in the shop sometimes. Now, apples feature a lot in stories, so I'm going to tell you some stories about apples. Some of these stories are true, and some of them are sort of made up. Now, the first very, very famous story that I learnt about apples was about Adam and Eve in the Bible, in the book of Genesis. Now, if anybody's ever read the Bible, in the Bible it says that the first people were called Adam and Eve. There were two people, and God put them in the Garden of Eden. And the Garden of Eden was wonderful. There were beautiful flowers. It was very warm. There was enough to eat. And Adam and Eve, they didn't have to work. They could do whatever they wanted. They were in paradise and they were very, very happy. But God said to them, "You can eat anything you like in the Garden of Eden except the fruit that is growing on this one particular tree." And that tree was called the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And he warned Adam and Eve not to eat from the tree of knowledge. Now, what happens when somebody tells you not to do something? I know that if people tell me not to do something, it sometimes crosses my mind that I might do it anyway. Well, that's exactly what happened with Adam and Eve. There was a naughty serpent in the garden, that's a snake, and he whispered in Eve's ear, "Why don't you take some fruit from the tree of knowledge? Because if you do, you'll know everything. You'll know as much as God knows." And it's also a very nice fruit to eat. So Eve thought, well, what harm can it do? And so she picked a fruit from the forbidden tree, and it is thought, it's always said, that that fruit was an apple, and the tree was an apple tree. I told you that there's two sides to apples. There's the good side and the not so good side. So when Eve took the fruit off the tree and she bit into it, and then she gave some to Adam, and she said, "Take a bite, it's marvellous. It won't do you any harm." And so he bit into it too. And then God found out. He got really, really angry. He said that you disobeyed me, and now I'm going to throw you out of the Garden of Eden, and now you'll have to work for your living. You will have to labour and toil. You could have had everything. You could have been in paradise, and you could have stayed in paradise if you'd done what I said. But you didn't, and now you'll have to leave the Garden of Eden. And that's the story about the apple and the tree of knowledge. Now, here's another story, an older story. My name is Pomona, and that's an ancient Greek name. I was an ancient Greek goddess. Now, yesterday you met Ceres, didn't you? And Ceres mentioned that she had a friend called Juno. Now, Juno is not her real name. Juno changed her name now that she lives in Rome, and her husband changed his name too to Jupiter. But before, they used to be called Hera and Zeus, and I knew them. Anyway, one day, Hera and another goddess called Athena, and also Aphrodite, were fighting over an apple. They were fighting over a golden apple, arguing about which one of them should have it, which one of them deserved it most. Now, there was a young, very good-looking, noble youth called Paris. And though they asked if Paris could decide which of the three goddesses deserved the apple. Now, Paris, after thinking about it for some time and listening to everything that they had to say, said, well, actually, he thought that Aphrodite should have the apple because she was the goddess of love. And so the beautiful golden apple was given to Aphrodite. But it didn't end there. Oh no. Well, Hera, Juno, and Athena were very, very angry, and they plotted revenge, and they were very jealous of Aphrodite, who later on was called Venus. And they decided that they would punish Paris for deciding that Aphrodite should have the apple. Now, Paris met and fell in love with a very beautiful woman called Helen of Troy. But with all the meddling and the anger and the jealousy and confusion, the goddesses caused the War of Troy. And this war went on for many, 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 many years. And it was called the Trojan War. So that's a story with an apple in it that didn't have a very happy ending. Here's a very famous story that I'm sure you know about, and that's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs features an apple quite centrally. So, Snow White lived with her wicked stepmother, the Queen. And the Queen had a magic mirror. And every day the Queen used to sit in front of the mirror and say, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? And the mirror would answer, you are, my Queen. But one day, when the Queen sat in front of the mirror and said, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? And the mirror answered, Snow White. And the Queen was so angry. She decided she was going to kill Snow White. Snow White found out and she ran away from the castle and went to hide in the forest. Now the seven dwarfs lived in the forest and they found Snow White and they said that Snow White could come and live with them and that they would keep her safe. But the Queen wasn't going to give up there. She knew that Snow White was alive because every time she asked the mirror, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all, the mirror would answer Snow White. And so she sent out a henchman. And the henchman was to kill Snow White and bring her heart back to prove to the Queen that Snow White was dead. Well, the henchman went in search of Snow White and he found her. But he didn't have the heart to kill her. So he killed the deer instead and took the deer's heart back to the Queen. But the Queen wasn't fooled for very long because the next time she asked the mirror, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? The mirror answered, Snow White. So she knew Snow White was still alive. So she decided to take matters into her own hand, and she went out into the forest, and she posed as an old crone. And then, when she saw Snow White, she pretended that she was really ill, and she begged Snow White to help her. She said, "I have had a heart attack. Please, please help me." And Snow White, who was a very kind person, said to the old lady, or she thought was the old lady, "Come back with me. Come back to the cottage and you can rest there." Now, in order to thank her, the Queen, posing as the old crone, said, "You're such a kind girl. Why don't you take this apple as a gift from me?" So she gave Snow White the apple. And Snow White looked at the apple, and it was very beautiful and rosy, and it looked delicious. And so she took a bite, and the apple wasn't an ordinary apple, it was poisoned. And so Snow White fell into a sleep, as if she was dead. And the Queen ran away back to the castle, and when she asked the mirror on the wall, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all?" the mirror answered, "Why, you are, my Queen." So the Queen was very happy. She thought she had succeeded. Now when the 7 dwarfs came back and they found Snow White lying cold and white on the bed, they realised that she had died. Now they didn't want to bury her in the ground, and so they buried her in a glass coffin so that they could look at her. And when they asked all the animals to come round and have a look at her, they all passed the coffin. They were all so sad. And one day, a prince was riding through the forest, and he'd heard about this beautiful girl who lay in a glass coffin, and he decided he wanted to have a look at her. And so he rode past on his horse, and when he saw Snow White laid out in the glass coffin, he fell in love with her instantly. And he decided he wanted to kiss her. And so he lifted up the coffin and kissed her on the mouth. And of course we all know what happens in fairy stories when princes kiss princesses or kiss the main heroine of the story. They wake up, and that's what happened with Snow White. She woke up and the prince broke the spell. And then the Queen was no longer the most beautiful person again, but the animals were so angry at what she'd done to Snow White that they chased the Queen. They chased her to the end of a cliff. And then this violent thunderstorm came, and the thunderbolt struck the Queen, and then she fell off the cliff and into the sea and died. And that was the end of the story. And of course, because it's a fairy story, Snow White and the prince lived happily ever after. Now, there are some other stories about apples, but these are true stories. And one of them concerns a student in the 17th century. His name was Isaac. Now, when Isaac was a young man, he was at university in Cambridge. And just like now, with the COVID-19 pandemic, there was an outbreak of another pandemic, the plague, when he was at university. And so all the students were sent home to do their studies at home, just like people were sent home from schools and universities earlier on in the year to do their studies from home. Now, Isaac didn't have the internet, so he just used to sit reading. And he was sitting one day, so he went home to his parents, and he was sitting one day when the weather was quite nice in the summer, the end of the summer, around September, underneath his parents' apple tree in the orchard. And, as often happens if you sit under an apple tree in the autumn, an apple fell down and bogged him on the head. Now, it didn't hurt him, but Isaac started to think, why is it that apple fell down like that? Why didn't it just go out to the sides, or why didn't it go up in the air when it came off the apple tree? Why did it fall down? And all this thinking about why the apple fell down and not up led Isaac to discover the law of gravity. He realised that something was pulling the apple down, like it was pulling all of us down, and that thing was gravity. Now, if Isaac had sat under an apple tree on the moon, for example, I know there are no apple trees on the moon, but if there were apple trees on the moon and Isaac had been sitting under an apple tree on the moon and an apple had fallen out of the tree, well, would it have fallen down? The answer is no, it wouldn't have fallen down, because there is no gravity on the moon. So the apple would have just floated around in the air forever and ever and ever. And in fact, Isaac would have floated around in the air too, because the moon doesn't have any gravity. But the earth does have gravity, and that's why when you let something go, it falls down. So the last two famous little apple stories are true, are from real life. And the first of these is the Beatles, the famous pop group in the 1960s. Their recording studio was called the Apple Studio, and they recorded under the Apple label. And you didn't have digital music in those days. You had records. You had small records, singles they were called, and then you had bigger records, and they were long plain discs. But in the middle of the disc, the Beatles put a picture of an apple. In fact, they put a picture of a Granny Smith. So they had the Apple label, and it was very famous. So the very modern famous Apple story is this one. What do you think this is? This is an iPad, and it's made by a company called Apple. And they didn't use the whole apple like the Beatles did. They used an apple with a bite out of it as their symbol. And they've got Apple phones, we've got Apple computers, we've even got Apple watches now. So apples are really very famous fruits. They've been famous for thousands and thousands of years. They are the alpha of all fruits. It's the first letter you learn in the English alphabet. A is for apple. So that's a very good reason to have an Apple Day and to celebrate apples. So because it's Apple Day, we are going to make some apple wishes. And if you make your wishes on Apple Day, they've got more chance of coming true. So I'm going to show you now how to make your apple wishes. Ooh. So let's make our apple wishes. And to make my apple wish, I'm going to use my apple chopping board. I'm not going to make a wish as big as this one, because it's rather gigantic, much bigger than any apple that I've ever seen. But I am going to put the chopping board on the table so that I don't damage the table while I make my apple wish. Now, I'm not very good at drawing. I've got some green paper here. I don't know whether you can tell it's green. You could have some red paper or just have some white paper. After all, the middle of apples is always white. So, because I don't trust myself to draw the right shape, I've cut an apple in half. So you could get someone to cut an apple in half for you. Now, I've dried this one off a little bit so it doesn't mess the paper up. It's a sort of average size of apple. And I put it down in the centre of the paper. I've got a pencil here and I'm just going to draw around it. And it's quite a good shape, actually. Some apples are more apple-shaped than others. And it's even got its little stalk on it. So I'm going to draw just a bit bigger than the stalk so that when I cut it out, the stalk doesn't fall off. So there, it's a bit wet. That doesn't matter. You can always dry it off with a bit of kitchen paper. So that's basically the shape of my apple. Now, I told you I wasn't very good at drawing. If you are good at drawing, you can just draw it. Or you can use a guide shape, which I've done there. I've got a felt pen here. And I'm going to draw around the shape that I've drawn with a pencil. It goes up at the bottom like that. It goes round here like that. And then up. Make the stalk a bit bigger than it really is, so that it's not too delicate and doesn't fall off. So I've got my apple shape now. Now here's another one that I made earlier. This is much nicer. This has got a nice wiggly pattern on there. And also, there's a much bigger one that somebody made for me, which is a very beautiful apple indeed. And I've already written my wish on there, so you're not supposed to see that. But that's on a bit of card, so it's a bit stiffer than this bit of paper. However, the paper's fine. So now I'm going to cut my apple wish out. If you've got lots of friends, brothers and sisters, and you all want to make wishes, then there's plenty of paper here, and you can use the paper to make some other apple wishes. So cut out the apple, following the shape. It's quite simple, really. And now, there's my little apple. So now I'm going to use a hole punch. Punch a hole into the top of the apple, not too near the top. There we are. So there is my little apple wish. And then I can take some string or a ribbon and push it through the hole and then tie it in a little knot. And then I'm all ready to write my wish and hang it on the apple tree. So, here's one that's already got its string attached. So now is the very magical, special part. What are you going to write on your apple wish? Now this is a very personal thing. You have to think very, very hard. And it needs to be something that you care lots and lots about. And if you wish with all your heart that it will come true, then write it down on the apple wish. I wish. Think of your wish and write it down. That. I've made my wish. Have you made yours?
So now it's time to tie your apple wish to the apple tree. Now this is the wish that I've written. There it is, nice and large so you can see it. I wish we can all be together in person next year. And I'm going to hang it on my costard tree. The main thing about a wish is it has to be something that's important to you. Something that you wish very, very hard. And then it'll come true. I'm also going to put my little corn dolly on the apple tree too. The Lion's Part October Plenty 2020. So this is for series, this is for you. I'm going to put her right up there. So that's a real celebration of corn and apples and all the wonderful things that come to us in harvest. So that's the end of the Apple Day workshop. I wish you lots and lots of luck making your apple wishes. I hope all your wishes come true. Now, do send your apple wishes into us. Take a photograph of them and put them on our Facebook page or on our Twitter feed or on Instagram, or just send them to info@thelionspart.co.uk. We'd love to see your apple wishes, what you're wishing for this year. I know that I wish that we could all be together in person, and I certainly hope that we can all be together in person next year. So, have a wonderful Apple Day and keep looking out for the different workshops every day.
Cool! That was amazing! What an extraordinary thing. I never knew there were so many different varieties of apple. Well, if you enjoyed that, come back tomorrow at 11 AM because we're going to meet Callum and he's going to tell us all about hats. In fact, he's going to tell us how to make one of our own. So come along 11 AM tomorrow for Callum's hat workshop. You won't regret it.